An elf tossing competition, a jet set Santa, and Santa's big helpers.
It all made headlines this week in history here on Rochester's first TV station. And here is News 8 Now's Dave McKinley with News 8 Then.
10 years ago this week, as the structural steel was first being placed to support the seats at Frontier Field, the now frowned upon practice of dwarf tossing was given a Yuletide twist in the form of an elf tossing competition. There was good news as a powerful storm which walloped much of the Northeast pretty much spared Rochester its wrath. And there was bad news when Kathie Lee Gifford produced the first of what would become a series of annual Christmas specials, and we decided to air it this week in 1995. 20 years ago this week, with seatbelt use now mandatory for car passengers, thoughts began to turn to requiring them for kids riding school buses. And amid the desired boom boxes and Swatch watches on the shopping list, there was the most coveted toy of that Christmas shopping season. Feeling benevolent for the holidays, I offer up this gimme as this week's News 8 Then pop quiz. Do you know who this is? Oh, and back then a fellow billing himself as Jet Set Santa was flying about spreading cheer to airline passengers. And not calling them Grinches or anything, but I would guess that the TSA would take a dimmer view of this today than it would have this week in 1985. 30 years ago this week, one of the longest and most bitter strikes of the 1970s hereabouts came to an end when unionized workers at the Lakeshore Nursing Home approved a new contract after having hit the bricks some 7 weeks before. We got our first glimpse at what would become one of the biggest boondoggles in Monroe County history when planners unveiled the scale model of the Resource Recovery Plant, later commonly called the Big Blue Elephant. Just like now, Monroe Avenue in the neighborhood of Pittsford Plaza was crowded with the cars of holiday shoppers. Unlike now, Tobin's was still processing the piggies and popping out the hot dogs locally. Lots of hot dogs. This week in 1975. 40 years ago this week, firemen at Engine 15 on Monroe Avenue continued their long-time tradition of assembling the old toys they'd spent the whole year collecting and fixing for distribution to needy children. And downtown, an early present from Monroe County, a load of steel beams, specially gift-wrapped, arrived to be used for construction of a new social services building. The one on Westfall near Mount Hope is still very much in use today since it was erected in the days of News 8 Then.
This is News 8 Now.
The answer to the News 8 Then pop quiz about the most sought-after toy 20 years ago, Teddy RUXPIN, the world's first animated talking toy. And by the way, did you know the makers of Teddy RUXPIN reintroduced the talking bear this year?